9 years have already passed since an indescribable crime against humanity, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, was systematically begun. Now in its 9th year, 1926, a government exists which calls itself a worker and peasant government, but not one true worker or farmer has ever sat on it. For 9 years, torture has been used in the name of democracy as an official instrument of the state. And in the name of socialism millions of outright individuals have been murdered, put to death through starvation, or banished from home and hearth to every distant part of the globe. In the name of the proletariat the Russian people has been subjugated by rank foreigners, their speech has been silenced, and their bodies sent, to the cheers of the Jewish Third International, into mass graves. An old Russian expression says, there are never more lies told than before a war and after a hunt. And in point of fact the Great War, World War I, never had a true armistice, it never really ended. And the hunt for more human skulls, of course only Christian and Aryan skulls will do, continues in accordance with a sinister and systematic plan. And thus the great lie blooms forth, in effect a form of worship of the father of lies, by that international scum calling itself the Bolsheviks. Mundus vult decipi, the world wants to be deceived. It believes Soviet lies and fairy tales and even participates in this sick comedy, sending delegations of well-known people, leftists of course, incapable of understanding the Russian language, and sympathetic to boot with the goals of the Third International. The Third International was the third great convention meeting held by ultra-radical Jews and Marxists in 1919 to coordinate communist activities worldwide. Off these foreign guests go to Soviet Russia to study the situation. These splendid chaps have no idea what Russia was like before the Bolsheviks, and what it could have become without them in the meantime. On the other hand, the Soviet Union's new friends show great knowledge and appreciation for our Russian caviar and vodka. The caviar is good, the vodka burns like fire going down, and in the brain fog of democratic goodwill one somehow misses the rivers of blood, the dashed brain fragments, and the slithering clatter of millions of slaves' chains. And so internationalist democracy celebrates its rites of sacrifice. The Christian lamb it slaughtered, Ananias and Caiaphas, Jewish leaders in the Sanhedrin who condemned Jesus to death, today representing international stock market capital, are the guests of honor at the feast. Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky. The four Jews, Marx, Engels, Lenin and Trotsky, who helped to destroy the Christian Russia of the Tsars and replace it with an atheistic communism in which 66 million Russian Christians were put to death in the gulags run by the Cheka. 2. The systematic destruction of Russia. The old Russia no longer exists. In its place we have a vast desert, its intelligentsia 90% annihilated, its middle class throttled, its working class made serfs once again, but this time serfs in state-owned factories, workers who just for using the word strike can be put up against the wall. As for the farmer, now he is a mere beast of burden, a camel in the Soviet-made Sahara, laboring without question for his Jewish exploiters and nearly without pay. For a non-initiated it must be entirely incomprehensible how such a mighty empire, seemingly in one night of revolution, could be set aflame at all four corners and destroyed. However, in one night it did not happen. The events of March 1917, Kerensky's middle-class overthrow of the Tsar, and of November 1917, the Bolshevik putsch against Kerensky's government, were only the visible result of years of patient, mole-like undermining activities by the Jewish International, a work which did not begin in the criminal minds of Marx, Trotsky, and Engels, but instead in an earlier alliance of Jewry with the higher grades of world Freemasonry. These lofty idealists have tortured and killed, in the name of Russia's workers and peasants, and according to their very own statistics, the following numbers of victims in the first 4 years of the glorious Russian Revolution: 28 bishops of the church, 1,215 priests and 6,000 monks. Why? Just because they were bishops, priests and monks, and because they believed in God, who is of course merely a disposable middle-class superstition. Next come 8,800 Christian doctors and their aides. Why? Because they represented non-Jewish middle-class medicine. Now come the officers, 54,650 army and naval officers, 10,500 police officers, lieutenant rank and above, and 48,500 lower-ranking policemen. And for what reason? Because they were military and police officers, and we all know that militarism is no longer permissible for any nationalistic and Aryan-conscious white people. It is only allowed to red bandits, who call themselves proletarians, to dig the real proletariat a mass grave. Then there are 260,000 flag-loyal soldiers of the old army, all now executed. But even this statistic is trifling. Now come the intelligentsia, teachers, professors, engineers, building contractors, writers and judges, especially judges, because these were the most dangerous for a state ruled by convicted felons. To them let us add lawyers, district attorneys and all the college-educated occupations, to reach the number of 361,825 murdered members of our most mentally demanding professions. I will not even tarry over our annihilated class of large landowners, consisting of 12,950 persons. And when someone asks me how the Russian intelligentsia can bear the Bolshevik yoke, I always answer that the Russian intelligentsia is either literally 6 feet under or in exile, and that the tiny remainder left over has suffered such a bloodletting and systematic humiliation through the communist steamroller that they have forfeited every last bit of self-esteem and personal honor. Finally, we come to the modest numbers of workers and peasants executed by the worker and peasant state. They amount to only 192,350 workers and 815,000 peasants. All these figures are official statistics published by the Cheka, forerunner of the KGB, and printed in easily obtainable Bolshevik newspapers during this period when the anti-communist White Russian forces were fighting Trotsky and the Red Army, 1917 to 1921. All these facts can be verified in the complete volumes of information or excerpts published in 1922 by the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Kingdom of Serbia, the only country in Europe which is fighting mercilessly against the disease of communism. Even this enormous number of casualties is small compared to the mentally ill persons now running around free in Soviet Russia, 4,800,000 of them. But this is no surprise. Even the old Russia did not have enough sanatoria and hospitals for them. Now the whole country has become a madhouse. The murders continue and the blood flows on, albeit only Christian and Aryan blood. When during the 1922 famine, 30,000 human beings were dying every day, Jewish leader Trotsky made the sarcastic remark, "All the better, look at the paperwork that will save us now." 3. Tsars assassinated by the Jews. After Nicholas I, his son Alexander II mounted the throne, a true friend of his people. In 1861 he abolished serfdom and gave the peasants land. This reform happened through the mere arrangement of village communities, an institution far closer to true and sincere communism than the capitalistic, tax-exploitative system we see in Soviet Russia today. This same Tsar, Alexander II, who in 1864 gave his people a whole new trial procedure for their court system, then the fairest and most progressive in Europe, underwent 7 attempts to assassinate him, until finally, in an 8th attempt perpetrated by Goldman, Lieberman and Zuckerman, can anyone mistake the race? Successfully carried out the wishes of London. Great Britain was by this time in the control of the Jewish bankers of the City of London. Alexander II, the great benefactor of his nation, was dynamited on March 1, 1881, the very day that he was to bestow on his country a new, constitutional form of government. Alexander II was gone. Alexander III now became Tsar. With respect to this monarch who preserved European peace, we Russians were all convinced that when he died in 1894, he had succumbed to a normal illness, in this case an acute kidney infection. How great was afterward our amazement when we learned, on the run, in exile, and from Jewish sources, that this Tsar too had fallen victim to the criminal minds of the tribe of Judah. The Jew Saltus exults over this fact in his book The Imperial Orgy, published in New York in 1920. In his foam-mouthed delirium over the successful downfall of the Christian Aryan world, he explains in his book how the Jews, working with the Entente powers, England, France, the US and Italy, got rid of the Tsars one after the other. He further relates that, at the same time as Russian churches were praying for the health of the Tsar, he was being cursed in the synagogues. To the bedside of the sick Tsar his personal physician, Zakrin, was summoned. Zakrin, a perfectly good Russian name, and yet, a Jew. When he arrived to see the Tsar in Livadia, he had the medicine all ready for him in his vest pocket. The kind of medicine is easy to imagine, a one-way ticket into the next world. After the trusting Tsar had swallowed the medication and was rolling in pain on his bed, Zakrin bent over him, according to Saltus, with a diabolical grin on his face. The Tsar choked out the words, "Who are you?" Zakrin's answer, "I am a Jew." And with enormous chutzpah, he then turned to the Empress and the Tsar's ministers and said, "Not to worry, His Majesty is only talking in a fever." Then he bent over the dying man and grinned at him again, "You are breathing your last breath, and we have won." This comes straight from the Jew Saltus in his book The Imperial Orgy. 4. The murder of millions of Christians by the Cheka. And then the Russian Revolution came. Who were these friends of the common people who in the name of freedom, equality, and democracy began annihilating the Christian Aryan population? Undoubtedly there were among them some true idealists who really believed that they could use murder and manslaughter, robbery and theft, to make a happier world and a new paradise of equality. The well-known result, however, was a living hell consisting of hunger, deprivation, despair and inequality only in one's right to be murdered by the Jewish-controlled Cheka, forerunner of the KGB. The word Cheka is not only an acronym in Russian for Special Commission for Fighting Counter-Revolution, but also a Yiddish expression for animal slaughter. How fitting this expression. We Christians, who are called goyim or cattle, are in the Jewish view mere animals. Yahweh gave us human faces, however, so as to spare the Jews the distress of having servants who looked like animals. Paraphrased. The first provisional government, after the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II and just before the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, consisted exclusively of Freemasons of Romance language initiation, from France or Italy, and funded by English money. The criminality of this provisional government knew no bounds, because it did the most despicable thing a government can do. It ignored the promises, purposes and ideals for which it was put in power, and for which it had overthrown the Tsar, head of state. The 9 months of this government was nothing but a gestation period, and horribly pregnant Russia gave birth to the miscarriage from hell on October 27, 1917. It can rightly be said that power was lying there on the street and the Bolsheviks merely picked it up. To provide a show for the friendly democracies abroad, there had to be street battles in Russia. And so the Prime Minister Kerensky, a half-Jew whose real name was Kurbis, meaning pumpkin, deliberately sent a battalion of women and young officer cadets into the jaws of a howling and murderous mob, where they were sadistically annihilated. Meanwhile Kerensky, dressed in a sailor suit, fled St. Petersburg. Just before that, Kerensky had signed, for publicity reasons, an arrest warrant against the traitor Trotsky, Bronstein. But when General Polovtsev showed up with his Cossacks in Trotsky's apartment to arrest him, there sitting in a plush armchair with Trotsky was Kerensky, sipping a liqueur. He took the arrest warrant from the astonished general's hand, theatrically tore it up, and sent the general on his way, a man who lacked the courage to simply arrest both these scum, for in a revolution, the first one to pick up his stick is on top. In any case, the Russian and foreign publics were to be treated to scenes of urban warfare and bloodshed. Aryan blood, of course. 5. Lenin, a syphilitic psychopath. The Mensheviks, or majority people, wanted a peaceful socialist welfare state and limited state ownership of industries as in Sweden. The Bolsheviks, or minority people, that is, mostly Jews, wanted a reign of terror and total nationalization under Lenin and Trotsky. The Mensheviks made only one condition, that Lenin explain himself with respect to allegations of theft from the party. When the convention began and Lenin was challenged to give an account of himself, he stood up, stuck his hands in his pockets and proclaimed that his standing was so high in the party that he owed no one any answers. When Lenin first arrived in Russia from Germany, he was already demented from untreated or poorly treated syphilis. Lenin. With this softening of the brain, a sort of gumming of the tissues, he was now fully qualified to pour his criminal fantasies into the ears of the foaming mob. Russia already stood in flames, and the shabby gang of brigands were encouraged by Lenin's slogan, "Rob back what they robbed from us." And so the mob hurled themselves upon the meager remains of Russian society. Under the joyful croakings of Jewry, Mother Russia was submerged. The brain disease which afflicted Lenin continued to take its course. One insane idea after another issued forth from his government. The most renowned doctors in Germany boarded airplanes in an attempt to jerry-rig this decrepit swindler statesman, but he descended further and further into mental confusion. It is said that before his death he experienced a few shafts of mental light during which he crawled on all fours on the carpet and whimpered pitifully, "Forgive me, Lord, forgive." Truly, truly the international proletariat can be proud, its leader a thief, its prophet a syphilitic, its greatest man a mass murderer. Instead of leading mankind into the bright light above the clouds, it has jammed humanity down into the sewer, and it is no accident that his mausoleum, Lenin's tomb, looks today like a public lavatory. The last of the Romanovs, Tsar Nicholas II and his family. After the February Revolution of 1917, Nicholas II abdicated his throne and took refuge with his family in a house in Yekaterinburg. The Tsar, his wife, his son, his 4 daughters, his servants and family doctor were all killed in the same room by the Bolsheviks on the night of July 17, 1918. It has since been confirmed that Lenin ordered the clandestine killings from Moscow. Veteran British journalist Robert Wilton explains in his cult classic, The Fall of the Romanovs, how the murder of the Tsar and his family was orchestrated entirely by Jews. The whole record of Bolshevism in Russia is indelibly impressed with the stamp of an alien invasion. The murder of the Tsar, deliberately planned by the Jews Sverdlov, and carried out by the Jews Glushchikin, Siri-Militov, Sifrov, Voykov, and Yurovsky, is the act not of the Rusin people, but of this hostile invader. Robert Wilton, The Fall of the Romanovs, p. 148. 6. Trotsky, another killer of Christians. Lenin's great rival was a man who nearly exceeds him in treachery, viciousness and sadistic love of executions, the Jew Lev Bronstein, who now calls himself Leo Trotsky. This Bronstein-Trotsky character formerly was an ultra-radical writer of gall-dripping articles for Jewish newspapers. But long before the war he was an agent of the Tsarist secret police in Vienna, reporting on Russian Jews who had deserted from the Russian armed forces. Trotsky, a full-blooded Jew, betrayed his racial brothers to the Russian government for 150 gold crowns a month, about $200. This perhaps tells us all we need to know about him. He moved to St. Petersburg and founded a very bourgeois and capitalist freight-moving business. Later he got into the business of lopping off heads when it became more advantageous to be a communist. The whole communist system under Soviet Judea is shot through with bizarre values. While pure communism is said to promise a community of sharing, the slogan of Russian communism seems to be, "What's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine, too." Trotsky cartoon. This anti-Bolshevik propaganda poster, dated to 1919, shows Leon Trotsky, born Lev Davidovich Bronstein, as a devil. Elements of the imagery reveal anti-Semitism. A popular anti-communist tactic was to overplay the role of Jews in the Russian Bolshevik Revolution. From a Zionist website, attempting to minimize the role played by Jews in the Bolshevik Revolution. See here. The Chinese soldiers, presiding here over a mound of corpses and shooting Russian Christians to death, were hired mercenaries for the Jewish Bolsheviks. They did the Jews' dirty work for them. Their reputation for sadistic torture on behalf of their Bolshevik employers was legendary. Thus they were responsible for introducing into Europe the infamous rat torture, a variation of which was to appear later as the horrendous climax of Orwell's 1984. Famous Trotsky quote, 1917. "We must turn Russia into a desert populated by white Negroes upon whom we shall impose a tyranny such as the most terrible Eastern despots never dreamt of. The only difference is that this will be a left-wing tyranny, not a right-wing tyranny. It will be a red tyranny and not a white one. We mean the word red literally, because we shall shed such floods of blood as will make all the human losses suffered in the capitalist wars pale by comparison. The biggest bankers across the ocean will work in the closest possible contact with us. If we win the revolution, we shall establish the power of Zionism upon the wreckage of the revolution's funeral, and we shall become a power before which the whole world will sink to its knees. We shall show what real power is. By means of terror and bloodbaths, we shall reduce the Russian intelligentsia to a state of complete stupefaction and idiocy and to an animal existence." From the Memoirs of Aaron Simonovich, quoted in The Nature of Zionism by Vladimir Stepan, Moscow, 1993, and translated from Russian into English by Clive Lyndhurst. 7. Fiendish tortures devised by the Jewish Cheka. For all time these names, the Jew Trotsky, the Pole Dzerzhinsky, the Russian Maros, the Latvians Lazis and Peter, all these being the original creators of the infamous Cheka, will stand out in world history as mass murderers. Even the bloodiest persecutions of Christians under Tiberius or Nero and the most grotesque tortures of the Spanish Inquisition under Torquemada, a converted Jew, pale by comparison with the indescribably gruesome deeds committed by the Jewish and Latvian Romchika. A whole shelf of books with both written and photographic documentation has been published on this theme. I need mention only The Blood Intoxication of the Bolsheviks by Nilo Stonsky, The Battle Against Bolshevism by Avalov, The Plague Over Russia by Albert Rosenberg, Soviet Russia by Katharina Haug, and The Cheka by Georg Popov. Here now are some of the gruesome tortures devised by the Jewish Cheka for its mostly Russian Christian victims. When the Reds occupied a city, they took hostages, such as people wearing ties or workers in their Sunday best. They stripped them naked and then bound onto the stomach of the murder victim an empty flower pot into which a ravenous, starving rat was placed. Through the small water hole in the base of the flower pot a red-hot iron rod was pushed to torment the rat and make him wild, causing him to try to burrow himself away from the rod, and deep into the abdomen of the horrified human victim. The rat torture, a red-hot poker, when pushed through the bars of the cage, would force the maddened rat to escape by gnawing its way into the stomach of the human prisoner. They lined up other victims in military formation, then ordered the first row to place one hand upon a wooden table. A nail was driven through the hand into the wood. Then they cut a full circle around the wrist skin, drenched the hand in boiling water and pulled the hand and finger skin right off. This they called making gloves. Interestingly, each torture chamber had its own special torture lady, always a Jewess or Latvian female, usually with a nickname such as Dora, the glove maker, or Rosa, the glove lady. It comes as no surprise to us to learn that the Chief Justice of a criminal court in Moscow is also a Jewess, Anya Glezman, who is said to love pronouncing death sentences above all else, and, according to a fawning newspaper article about her, she loves flowers and perfume after a hard day's work. There is more, such as placing a man's head on an anvil, then slowly exploding it using a huge iron hammer with ever-increasing weights. Those fated to suffer the same death the following day were ordered to pick up the brain and bone pieces, the nerve tissue and blood which they witnessed flying around the room. When ordered to their work they were told, "You are digging your own grave. You must be happy that tomorrow your own kind will be picking up the pieces of your cadavers. As for men of the cloth, they would bring priests into a church, marry them with a sow or mare in a sarcastic ceremony and then nail them to the cross over the altar. The Bishop of Oranish was plunged live into a giant kettle of boiling water and his monks were forced at revolver point to take spoonfuls of the soup. High-ranking clergymen had their eyes gouged out, the tongue severed, and the ears sliced off. Then they were buried alive. Or their abdomen was opened with a knife and the first section of their intestines was nailed to a telephone pole. They were then forced to run around the pole as their entrails unwound until death came. Officers of the Russian Navy were steamed to death in their own engine rooms. They were chained to cement blocks and hurled off the piers so that their tethered corpses, decomposing and rising under the waves, formed hideous, tossing forests of the dead. General Viren of Kronstadt had both his arms hacked off and was then paraded around the downtown area until it became boring, whereupon he was shot. Human beings had burning cigars pushed into their open eyes until they were blind, their entire body being roasted on spits. Heads were squeezed slowly to the bursting point with special brain vises. The German army discovered a chamber full of these and similar devices, including a testicle cracker, in an underground chamber in Ukraine in 1941. Adapted dentist drills were used to drill deep into the brain. They sawed off the top of people's skulls and forced others to eat their brains, whereupon the eaters then came under the saw and in turn had their own brains eaten. Paraphrased. Entire families were arrested and children tortured before the eyes of their bound parents, or the wife was tormented before the eyes of her husband or the reverse. The Bolsheviks drove nails into empty wooden barrels, then jammed human beings inside, rolling the barrels around merrily. Mass graves of people buried alive were found by the White Army. Victims of live burial usually have dirt in their mouth and nostrils from trying to breathe. The writhing bodies of these people were found in the most bizarre contortions. And all of this in the sweet name of freedom and democracy. Further corroboration for these horrendous crimes will be found in this recent article by Dr. Lasha Darkmoon. The most detailed and impassioned account, however, remains Eustace Molin's cult classic The Secret Holocaust. The real Holocaust was a Christian Holocaust by Jews of 66 million, mostly Christians.